disheartening. But what I am seeing right here in Kalamata, in fact, where I am in the very south of Greece, a city of a population of about 80,000 people, is mass protests by farmers, and this is happening all over Europe. And I've been spending a lot of time here in the last couple of years. I have not seen anything like this in Kalamata. When I came into town, returned after a 3-month absence, as I entered the town, there were tractors with Greek flags lined up all along the main boulevard entering into the center of Kalamata. And these farmer protests are happening all over Europe. And really what's driving them is it's becoming increasingly difficult for these farmers to actually make a reasonable living from what they're doing. And a big part of the reason for that is energy costs. They've gone up enormously in Europe because primarily the European continent is being deprived of access to relatively inexpensive Russian energy, and particularly gas, and has become increasingly reliant upon liquefied natural gas from the United States, which is not only much more expensive than Russian gas delivered to the market in Europe by pipeline, it's also more polluting. And so this is having a cascade of effects upon people in this country, not just farmers, but they got fed up. And at the very moment when these protests were happening, I mean, it's really amazing to behold this. The European Union strong-armed the government of Hungary into agreeing, because they were objecting to sending more money to Ukraine. They strong-armed them into agreeing to send another 50 billion euros to the most corrupt country in Europe at a moment when it is absolutely crystal clear to anybody with half a brain and an ounce of objectivity that Ukraine has lost this war. And the government is in crisis. I mean, the infighting that's going on and the intrigue and so forth. So we don't even know how much longer this government that we're sending all this money to is going to last in Ukraine, frankly. So this is creating real problems for European economies, and the political consequences are going to be severe. And the severity has already begun to manifest itself in the street.
I was thinking, how do you think the people will really react when the governments of the West continue to pass more and more spending appropriation bills for this proxy war at the expense of the veterans in each one of those nations' military, at the expense of the average person on the street, at the expense of the farmers, at the expense of the middle class, at the expense of the lower class? I mean, what do you think would be the reaction? We're seeing a little bit of it now, as you said, with the farmers. But do you think it's going to become more intense? Because to me, that's a spit in the face. If I'm the government official and you're paying me taxes and you're telling me, hey, we need some of that money for education. We need some of that money to reform healthcare. We need some of that money to create jobs. And you're telling me, and I'm telling you all the while, hey, we don't have money for that. And then you see me come back and discuss with my colleagues, we need to appropriate 40 billion, 60 billion, 100 more billion to Ukraine for a proxy war. Don't you think this thing is going to explode?
Oh, yeah. It's starting to explode. I mean, in Europe, let's look at the German government, been one of the biggest, pushers of this proxy war, this incredibly expensive and depraved proxy war. The government of Olaf Scholz, the social democratic chancellor, supposedly social democratic chancellor, his popularity has plummeted to almost a record low. And if he were to run today, based upon the polls in Germany, his party would be soundly beaten by a party known as the AfD, which the press, with some justification, characterizes as far right. And they don't like to talk about it in Germany, but a big part of the reason for this is the AfD is saying, stop sending money to this corrupt government in Ukraine, and let's reestablish energy ties with Russia. If this had been a position that had been adopted by one of the mainstream parties in Germany, they'd be wildly popular. But they've ceded that ground entirely to the AfD. And now there's a serious risk that this party, which does have, some pretty odious policy proposals, including especially with respect to immigrants, these people could find themselves in a position of power in Germany. So whatever happens, the German people are going to toss that government out of office. I mean, that's virtually inevitable at this stage. In Britain, the government of Rishi Sunak, the conservative government, again, vitriolically supportive of Zelensky's government, willing to do anything it can to exacerbate and escalate this war, is about to sustain a historic defeat to the Labour Party. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party in Europe, unfortunately, is not likely to pursue a different policy, but they're just so upset they're going to throw the bums out in Britain. Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, again, his main opponent at this stage is somebody who, with some justification, is characterized as being far right, the Marine Le Pen of the Front National. At this stage, if they were holding a presidential election in France, I think it's probable that he would lose. And again, Marine Le Pen is somebody who wants to reestablish friendly relations with Russia. And you can go right across the political board in this continent. This is a very dangerous situation because the only parties that are offering an alternative, as I mentioned, not just Germany, but elsewhere, to this approach to relations with Russia that's having extremely damaging effects on the European economy are parties of the so-called far right. If you want to keep these people out of power, the best way to do that is respond to the demands of the people. And if you don't, the entire political scene in this continent is going to be thrown into chaos. That's where it's heading. So hopefully saner heads are going to prevail soon, because it's going to become undeniable, probably sometime in the next few weeks, certainly within the next few months, that this war has been an absolute catastrophe from a military and economic perspective for Europe. In the United States, in Canada, it's different. I think the political reaction, you're seeing obviously resistance in Congress to sending more money to Ukraine. I don't know how successful ultimately that resistance is going to be. I think it's going to depend to some extent upon whether or not Trump defeats Biden. It does appear that Trump, for all of his immense flaws, is inclined not to continue to escalate and prolong this proxy war. But the United States has been less affected at the grassroots level economically by this, because I mentioned there's actually been some benefit to the U.S. petroleum industry. And of course, the arms manufacturers in the United States are making out like bandits from this proxy war. The vast majority of the weaponry is being provided by the United States. So they're actually profiting. But there are people in the United States who are hurting nonetheless, whatever the impacts of this particular war may have been upon ordinary Americans. There's millions of people who are homeless. There's probably well in excess at this stage of 100 million people in the United States who are living in poverty. The polls show that there is widespread discontent, even though the Democrats keep telling Americans the economy is, going gangbusters. There's widespread discontent with the economic management, and with perfectly good reason. Still there's a significant swath of the American public has no access to health care. The healthcare insurance that they're able to access is grossly inadequate, extremely costly. So eventually, the chickens are going to come home to roost in the United States as well, and I think that's begun. But Europe, because it's been impacted so much more negatively from an economic perspective by this war, there's going to be outright rebellion if they continue to pump money into Ukraine.